Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. Joseph Parker says he doesn't just want to fight anyone in his December 15th return. He wants to fight someone who's going to give him a challenge, someone that just won't lay down. And these comments that are reported by Radio New Zealand and see on screen here. So I'll get into them and then some thoughts, because a couple of other things that have been floating around in the mainstream media and other comments that Parker said more broadly. I just wonder if we're going to get another Duco special. And what I mean by that is the sort of 2014 to 2016 era of Joseph Parker, where sort of half-decent journeyman with padded records. Think of Daniel Martz, 1 or 2 losses on the record, halfway respectable, you can sell that sort of fight. It's going to be that sort of guy, I think we know it is. But to the comments, so he says, we're just trying to lock anyone in. Anyone with a good record, good experience, someone that's actually going to give me a good challenge. We don't want someone who's just going to come in and get punched over and knocked out. He later also said, yeah, I want a knockout. I don't care what round it is. 1, 2, 3, 4. I want to knock someone out. And that knockout stuff, I'll come to that a bit later on. But in terms of the opponent, one will have to be named shortly because Joseph Parker is fighting in 2 months' time. December 15th, that's all locked in. Christchurch, New Zealand, the Horncastle Arena. That's a conceit somewhere about 7,000 by the look of their website. But in terms of the opponent, David Higgins had already said last week that Joseph Parker's next opponent better sign the contract soon because they're just denying themselves training time. But apparently there's 2 or 3 options on the table. But given they've locked it in for New Zealand, given it is in Christchurch, the previous fight that was in Christchurch was a journeyman level fight, Solomon Hamono, sort of high level journeyman, but still journeyman territory. I would think we are going to get the same. And there was an article that came out after Parker's sort of announced fight for Christchurch that floated the idea of Alexander Flores. And you might be thinking, Alexander who? Not a lot of people will actually know Alexander Flores. And if we go to a BoxRec, you can see Alexander Flores, 183rd in the world. If we just click into his profile here, 17, 1, and 1. And I just think about the way that it was pitched by the website that ran the story mentioning his name. It was pitched as Alexander Flores is a name doing the rounds. And clearly his name is not doing any rounds with fans, with anyone, because hardly anyone knows who he is. Clearly Duco Events, which is very tight with stuff.co.nz, give them little tidbits all the time ahead of major fights. It's a well-established sort of feed them some information, and then there's a story run. So what I think has happened is they've had a tip that Alexander Flores is the most likely of the candidates that they've been targeting. And when I come back to the Duco special that I named before, Alexander Flores, he fits that perfectly. 17, 1, and 1. You can look at that and go, okay, well, that's not terrible. But then you go down to the actual record itself. There's not a lot there. Not a lot there at all. He's got a win over Keith Barr, Harold Sconiers. That's the guy who knocked Deontay Wilder down. He lost to Charles Martin. There was a draw with journeyman Avery Gibson. But really, there's not much of note there. No one is really looking for Alexander Flores in terms of him being a contender of note in the division. It's just not that sort of fighter at this point in his career. And he's currently, 28, USA fighter, 6'4". And if it is him, it will be another Duco special. Another guy, half-decent record. It will be on pay-per-view. Because Joseph Parker's fights in New Zealand are on pay-per-view. I don't see any way how they would do a free-to-air fight in New Zealand. Just because of the amount of money that it takes to put on those productions, pay for the undercard, and obviously Joseph Parker being still a pretty good contender in the division, he has certain expectations in terms of what he's going to get paid. And he's probably not going to get paid peanuts for this fight, especially if it's going to be on pay-per-view. That's how they look to make their money. That's been their model in New Zealand. I don't see how they could make a free-to-air fight work. It'd be great if it did. It really would. Then I wouldn't be so fussed if it was an Alexander Flores type opponent. But if it is that level of opponent, and not necessarily Flores, but if it was that type of opponent where the record is, one loss, that sort of stuff, it looks good on paper, they can market it, they can sell it to people, that is what they'll do. Because that is the proven formula that they've run time and time again on Joseph Parker's come up in the division. That's what they did, and it was highly successful for them. But I would say now, expectations have changed. Expectations on Joseph Parker are different to what they used to be. You could forgive some of that on the way up because you knew some of those fights were getting him to where he needed to be. Get rankings, slowly climb up the ladder, get into eliminators, all that sort of stuff, and eventually he climbed high enough, he started to get the higher level fights, Carlos Takam, etc., Alexander Dimitrenko, and then obviously he got a title shot against Andy Ruiz. Defended the belt a couple of times, but then lost it to Anthony Joshua. But the expectations the second time around, can they run that sort of formula again? I'm not so sure. Expectations are different now. Joseph Parker became a champion, defended the belt. His profile grew massively. He's fought the best in the world now, Anthony Joshua. He's had another very good fight in Dillian Whyte. But do people want to see him going back to facing Neville Nobodies on a pay-per-view that could be $30, $40, $50 in a fight that you already know the results? There will be a number of people going, yeah, I don't really know if I want to part, with my money for that sort of fight. I don't think it will be as successful the second time around. And I'm just speaking for myself here. I don't know if I'm willing to sort of pay for those sorts of fights again. I did the first time round, but like I already said, that was sort of part of that journey. And David Higgins used to say to people about when people would criticize the opponents or the crappy undercards, he would sort of attack them publicly, sort of saying, that we're funding Joseph Parker's journey. A lot of people think, well, the funding is over now. You need to give us the good opponents. And sure, Joseph Parker needs a knockout. He hasn't had one in 2 years. The last one was Alexander Dimitrenko, 2016. But people want to see Parker knock out someone who's at least halfway decent, someone with a bit of name recognition. I would much prefer to see Joseph Parker take out some sort of top 50 guy rather than a top 200 guy. And there are plenty of guys within the sort of top 50 or 60 that is certainly what many would regard as a soft-touch opponent for a comeback fight. And Parker himself has said the reason to come back to New Zealand is to give back to the fans. So if he was to give back a top 200 type opponent, what sort of gift is that? And I do wonder, how does that actually gel with his comments that he said to Radio New Zealand that we don't want someone who's just going to come in and get punched over and knocked out. But if the name Alexander Flores is mentioned, they're obviously looking at that sort of opponent, which means they want an easy win, a confidence builder, get a knockout, try to build a bit more hype. But I just don't, or not hype now, but trying to build some of the buzz back, because Parker, some of that exciting sort of style that he had on the come-up, he's not viewed like that anymore. He's had it very tough, gritty, hard, sometimes unexciting or unattractive fights more recently. And that's turned some fans off. But just going back to the sort of formula from 2014 to 2016, bringing in the guys who look like they've got a good record, but really they don't have a prayer, you got to ask yourself, do fans really want that, or is that just to generate money? And I think I know which one I would choose out of those two. Okay, what do you make of it all? Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter. Boxing_squared. That's boxing_squared. I'm out. They're complicit with the hype, the bluster, the bullshit. Yet there was no indication of really how good he was because the guys he were facing were trash. It's another stain on the WBA's reputation.